Every app on your phone answers to two masters. One speaks from Washington, one speaks from Brussels. And right now they're about to go to war over who controls what you can do with your own device.
On December 23, 2025, the United States government banned a former European official from entering the country. His name is Thierry Breton. He served as the European Commissioner for the Internal Market for 5 years. His crime, according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, was leading organized efforts to coerce American platforms to censor, demonetize, and suppress American viewpoints. The tool of this alleged coercion was not a weapon. It was not espionage, it was a regulation called the Digital Services Act.
So here is the question that will carry us through this whole film. When two regulatory empires use enforcement as a weapon, who actually controls the device in your pocket? And who decides what you can do with it? Open your phone settings now and count how many apps are made by companies based in California. Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft.
Now consider this. Every single one of those companies is now simultaneously subject to European laws written in Brussels and American political pressure from Washington. That overlap is no longer a technicality, it is a battlefield. The European Union has built the most comprehensive regulatory architecture for technology companies ever attempted by any government. 3 interlocking laws form its foundation. The Digital Markets Act, which governs how large platforms treat competitors and consumers. The Digital Services Act, which governs how platforms handle content, transparency, and illegal material. And the AI Act, which governs how artificial intelligence systems can be deployed, sold, and used.
These are not suggestions. They carry teeth.
Under the Digital Markets Act, a company found in violation can be fined up to 10% of its global annual turnover. For a repeat offense, 20%. Under the AI Act, penalties reach 35 million euros or 7% of global turnover, whichever is higher. For context, 10% of Apple's annual revenue would exceed $30 billion. 10% of Google's would exceed $28 billion. These are not regulatory fines. These are existential threats designed to force compliance. And the European Commission has made clear it intends to use them. On April 23, 2025, the Commission issued its first ever fines under the Digital Markets Act. Apple was fined 500 million euros for preventing app developers from directing users to alternative payment methods. The same day, Meta was fined 200 million euros for offering users only 2 choices: consent to full data tracking or pay a subscription fee. The Commission ruled this binary model violated the requirement to give users genuine choice over their personal data. In September, Google was hit with a 295 billion euro fine for antitrust violations in its advertising technology business. The Commission found Google had illegally favored its own ad services over competitors. It was Google's 4th major EU penalty in a decade. The total across all 4 cases now exceeds 11 billion euros. And then, on December 5, 2025, the Commission fined Elon Musk's platform X 120 million euros under the Digital Services Act. The violations included deceptive use of the blue verified checkmark, lack of transparency regarding advertisements, and failure to provide access to data for researchers. It was the first fine ever issued under the DSA. Elon Musk's response was immediate. The EU should be abolished, he wrote on his own platform, and sovereignty returned to individual countries so that governments can better represent their people. X then blocked the European Commission from placing advertisements on the platform. The regulator locked out of the regulated. The reaction from Washington was equally sharp. On December 16, 2025, the Office of the United States Trade Representative issued a public statement that read like a declaration of economic war. It accused European regulators of pursuing a persistent course of discriminatory and harassing lawsuits, taxes, fines, and directives against US service providers, and then it made a threat. If the EU and EU member states insist on continuing to restrict, limit, and deter the competitiveness of US service providers through discriminatory means, the United States will have no choice but to begin using every tool at its disposal to counter these unreasonable measures. The statement did not stop at vague warnings. It named specific European companies that could face retaliatory measures: Spotify, Siemens, Accenture, even Mistral, a French artificial intelligence startup that barely exists outside France, listed alongside giants worth hundreds of billions.
The message was clear. You fine our tech companies, we target yours.
But this escalation did not begin in December 2025. It did not even begin with Donald Trump's second term. The roots run deeper into a fundamental divergence in how Europe and America understand the relationship between government, corporations, and citizens. In 2019, Ursula von der Leyen campaigned for the presidency of the European Commission on a promise to create a new Digital Services Act. The goal was to update rules written in 2000 before social media, before smartphones, before algorithmic recommendation systems shaped what billions of people see every day. The existing framework assumed the internet was a neutral conduit. The new one would recognize that platforms are not merely pipes, they are architects of attention. On December 15, 2020, the Commission published its proposals for both the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. The legislative process that followed was remarkable. Both chambers of the European Parliament approved the final texts with over 90% support. This was not a close vote. It was a near-unanimous democratic choice by representatives of 450 million citizens.
The DSA and DMA are creating a safer digital space.
Thierry Breton, who later became the target of American sanctions, was the commissioner responsible for shepherding these laws through. In a recent interview, he explained his philosophy. Our objective was not to put fines, he said. I hate fines. I'm a former CEO myself. My duty was to explain to the platforms what they had to do to benefit from access to one of the largest, if not the largest, digital market on this planet. And by the way, it's extremely important. In Europe, we are welcoming everyone. That's our DNA. But we decided together that we had to put some rules to protect our children, to protect our fellow citizens, not more, but not less.
This is the core of the European position. The laws apply equally to all companies operating in the European Union. They are not designed to punish American firms. They are designed to protect European consumers.
If American companies happen to dominate the market, they will naturally face more scrutiny. But the American position sees it differently. During a House Judiciary Committee hearing in December 2025, Representative Scott Fitzgerald described the European approach in blunt terms. The DMA does not ask whether consumers have been harmed, he said. It does not even ask whether a business has done anything wrong. It asks whether a company is large, successful, and most importantly, American. Under these rules, innovation is treated as a threat and foreign rivals are handed access to data and technology they could never build or earn on their own. This framing transforms a regulatory dispute into a trade war by another name, and it provides the justification for what came next. On August 26, 2025, Donald Trump issued his clearest threat yet. Unless these discriminatory actions are removed, he wrote, I, as President of the United States, will impose substantial additional tariffs on that country's exports to the USA and institute export restrictions on our highly protected technology and chips. Any country with digital taxes, legislation, or regulations targeting American technology would face consequences. The European Union rejected the accusation. A spokesperson for the Commission said the bloc's regulations apply equally and fairly to all companies operating in the EU, and vowed to persist in enforcing our rules fairly and without bias to prevent the digital economy from becoming a Wild West. Teresa Ribera, who replaced Margrethe Vestager as EU Competition Commissioner, went further. The European Digital Rulebook is not up for negotiation, she said. She accused the United States of using blackmail. It is our duty to remind others that we deserve respect. And then, on December 23rd, came the visa bans. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that 5 Europeans would be barred from entering the United States: Thierry Breton, Imran Ahmed, Chief Executive of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, Josephine Ballon and Annalena von Hodenberg, leaders of Hate Aid, a German organization combating online harassment, Claire Melford, who runs the Global Disinformation Index. All were accused of leading organized efforts to pressure tech firms to censor American viewpoints. Breton's response was a single question posted to social media. Is McCarthy's witch hunt back? The French government condemned the decision. The European Commission defended its regulations, but the sanctions remained. A former European commissioner is now persona non grata in the United States because he helped write laws about how platforms display verification badges.
This is a hidden architecture that neither side wants to name directly. Regulation has become a weapon, enforcement has become foreign policy, and your phone is the territory they're fighting over.
Consider what this means in practice. When Apple was fined for its anti-steering rules, the Commission was not merely protecting app developers. It was asserting that European law has jurisdiction over how Apple designs its ecosystem. When the USTR threatened fees on Spotify, it was not merely protecting American companies. It was asserting that the United States can punish foreign businesses for the regulatory choices of their governments. Each side claims legitimacy. The EU points to democratic process, 450 million citizens, 27 member states, 90% parliamentary support. This is the choice of our democracy, Breton said. It doesn't belong to one person. The United States points to free speech and open markets. The Trump administration's national security strategy explicitly warned that European leaders were censoring free speech and suppressing opposition, risking what it called civilizational erasure.
These are not compatible worldviews and they cannot be reconciled by negotiation.
The European position holds that what is illegal in the street should be illegal online. Hate speech and incitement to terrorism, fraud and harassment. The Digital Services Act requires platforms to remove such content promptly. The American position holds that government mandates on content moderation constitute censorship, regardless of the content involved. The European position holds that dominant platforms should not be allowed to self-preference their own services, crush competitors through bundling, or trap users in ecosystems with no exit. The Digital Markets Act requires interoperability, data portability, and fair treatment of third-party developers. The American position holds that companies should be free to design their products as they see fit, and that success should not be penalized. The European position holds that artificial intelligence systems should be subject to human oversight, transparency requirements, and prohibitions on manipulative practices. The AI Act bans social scoring, covert manipulation, and certain uses of biometric recognition. The American position, at least under the current administration, holds that regulation stifles innovation.
There is no middle ground. Either platforms must comply with European law to access European consumers, or they do not. Either the United States retaliates against European companies for the regulatory choices of European governments, or it doesn't. We are watching now the fracturing of the global internet into regulatory blocks, not by firewall, but by law.
And the numbers show exactly where this is heading. In July 2025, the European Union released a list of $84 billion worth of American goods that would face retaliatory tariffs if negotiations failed. The February 2026 Supreme Court ruling struck down Trump's use of emergency powers to impose tariffs unilaterally, but the administration immediately announced plans to pursue the same goals through other legal channels. Meanwhile, the EU is preparing to intensify enforcement. Investigations into Meta and Google, announced in December 2025, will accelerate through 2026. The AI Act's rules for high-risk systems take full effect in August. Amazon and Microsoft are under probe for their cloud services. Apple has demanded that Brussels scrap the DMA altogether. Every escalation invites counter-escalation. Every fine provokes a threat, and every threat provokes defiance. The cost is not measured only in billions of euros or dollars. It is measured in uncertainty. In the interview with Thierry Breton, he was asked about timing. Is enforcement political or technocratic? His answer was careful. There's a time where human beings decide together to create a law because they think it is their responsibility to protect people, democracy, companies, whatever. And of course, when this is voted, it has to be respected. It's not against anyone, it's just for our people. But the same argument applies in reverse. The Trump administration claims to act for the American people, protecting American companies from foreign discrimination. Both sides believe they are defending sovereignty. Both sides believe the other is weaponizing regulation.
And both sides are correct. The Brussels effect is a term coined by Columbia law professor Annie Bradford to describe how European Union regulations become de facto global standards. When the cost of maintaining separate products for different markets exceeds the cost of universal compliance, companies simply adopt the stricter standard everywhere. GDPR reshaped global privacy practices. The DMA may reshape global platform economics. The AI Act may reshape global artificial intelligence development. But the Brussels effect assumes that companies have no alternative. It assumes that other powers will not push back. It assumes that regulation can flow outward without resistance. And that assumption no longer holds.
To understand why, you need to know the woman who built the machine that Teresa Ribera now operates. Margrethe Vestager served as Europe's competition commissioner for a decade. 2 consecutive terms. When she took office in 2014, no government on earth had successfully challenged the largest technology companies in court. By the time she left in 2024, she had fundamentally altered the relationship between regulators and Silicon Valley. The numbers tell part of the story. 3 separate antitrust cases against Google, 8.2 billion euros in fines against that single company, a landmark ruling that Apple owed Ireland 13 billion euros in unpaid taxes, a 2.4 billion euro fine against Google for illegally promoting its own shopping service, another 4.3 billion for bundling its search engine with Android phones, another 1.5 billion for restricting advertisers. Each case took years, each was appealed, and in September 2024, just weeks before Vestager left office, the European Court of Justice upheld both the Apple tax ruling and the Google shopping fine. 15 billion euros in penalties confirmed in a single week. Donald Trump called her the tax lady. Silicon Valley executives complained she was waging a vendetta. But Vestager's approach was methodical, not ideological. In interviews, she insisted she was simply applying existing law. Competition rules existed before these companies were born. Her job was enforcement. What Vestager understood, and what her critics refused to acknowledge, was that scale changes everything. A company that controls 90% of search traffic is not operating in a competitive market. A company that can bury competitors by manipulating its own platform is not competing fairly. A company that can track users across dozens of services to build advertising profiles has power that no previous business ever possessed. The DMA was designed to address that power directly. Rather than wait for harm and then prosecute, Europe decided to impose obligations in advance. If you are designated a gatekeeper, you must allow competitors access to your platform. You must let users uninstall preloaded apps. You must let developers communicate directly with customers. You must not use data from one service to advantage another. 6 companies were designated as gatekeepers in September 2023: Alphabet and Amazon, Apple and ByteDance, Meta and Microsoft. 6 American and Chinese technology giants suddenly subject to rules written by Europeans. The changes began appearing almost immediately. In January 2024, Apple announced it would allow alternative browser engines on iOS in Europe. Previously, every browser on iPhone was required to use Apple's WebKit rendering engine. Chrome, Firefox, Opera, all were Safari underneath. After the DMA, they could bring their own technology, the same device, different capabilities depending on where you stood. In March 2024, Apple announced it would permit sideloading in Europe. Users could download apps directly from the web, bypassing the App Store entirely. Third-party app marketplaces could operate on iPhone for the first time in the device's history. Apple warned this would introduce threats such as scams, malware, and pornography apps that were previously banned on its store. The Commission replied that adults should be trusted to make their own choices. By June 2025, facing potential fines in the billions, Apple announced further concessions. Developers could direct users to external websites for purchases without paying Apple's commission. The walled garden that defined the iPhone experience was being dismantled brick by regulatory force. Apple's response was to demand that Brussels scrap the DMA altogether. It's become clear that we can't solve every problem the DMA creates, the company said in September 2025. The Commission, forcing us to change our business model, effectively imposes a multi-billion-dollar tariff. But the Commission did not relent, and the changes kept coming. Google began offering Android users in Europe a choice screen for search engines and browsers. Meta offered European users the option to see less personalized advertising. Microsoft unbundled Teams from its Office suite. Amazon changed how it displays sponsored products versus organic search results. TikTok withdrew an addictive feature called TikTok Lite that rewarded teenagers with points for watching more videos. Breton personally contacted the CEO, and within days the feature disappeared from European markets. These are not cosmetic adjustments. They are fundamental changes to business models worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and they apply only in Europe. An iPhone in Paris works differently from an iPhone in San Francisco. An Instagram account in Berlin sees different advertising options than one in New York. A Google search in London returns results shaped by European law. Your phone is not neutral territory. It is a contested zone. The AI Act pushes this divergence further still. On February 2, 2025, the first prohibitions under the AI Act took effect. Social scoring systems that rate citizens based on behavior are now illegal in Europe. AI systems that deploy subliminal techniques to manipulate decisions are banned. Biometric categorization based on race, religion, or sexual orientation is forbidden. Emotion recognition in workplaces and schools is prohibited. Real-time facial recognition in public spaces is restricted to narrow law enforcement exceptions. These are not abstract principles, they are criminal prohibitions. A company that deploys a banned AI system in Europe faces penalties of up to 35 million euros or 7% of global revenue. For a company like Apple or Google, that could mean fines exceeding $20 billion for a single violation.
Many of our most productive tech companies are forced to deal with the EU's Digital Services Act.
The AI Act also requires transparency. If you interact with an AI system, you have the right to know. If content was generated by artificial intelligence, it must be labeled. If a decision about your loan, your insurance, your employment was influenced by an algorithm, you have the right to an explanation. In August 2025, obligations for general-purpose AI models took effect. Companies training large language models must document their training data, implement copyright safeguards, and cooperate with regulators. By August 2026, the full framework for high-risk AI systems will apply, covering everything from medical devices to autonomous vehicles to hiring algorithms. No other jurisdiction on Earth has attempted regulation at this scale. China has AI rules, but they focus on content control rather than rights protection. The United States has issued executive orders and sector-specific guidance, but no comprehensive legislation.
AI, we believe, is going to make us more productive, more prosperous, and more free.
Europe stands alone in asserting that artificial intelligence must be governed by law, but not left to the discretion of the companies that build it. This is the Brussels effect in its most ambitious form. If the rules work, other countries may adopt similar frameworks. If they fail, Europe risks falling behind in the most transformative technology of the century. But the rules assume that companies will comply. They assume that other governments will not actively obstruct enforcement. They assume that the cost of compliance will not be weaponized as a tool of economic warfare. The United States has made clear it will treat the Brussels effect as an act of extraterritorial overreach. It will punish companies in its own jurisdiction for complying with European law. It will sanction individuals who write or enforce those laws. It will threaten trade wars to force regulatory retreat.
The question is not whether these two systems will clash, they already have. The question is whether they can coexist at all, or whether we are witnessing the end of a single global internet and the beginning of regulatory blocks where your phone's capabilities depend on which government's rules govern its operation. Picture the moment it breaks. You open an app that works differently depending on whether you're standing in Berlin or Boston. The same device, the same account, the same user, but the features change, the content changes, the rules change. The internet fragments not by language or culture, but by jurisdiction.
This is not a hypothetical future. Apple already disabled Wi-Fi synchronization between iPhones and Apple Watches in Europe to avoid DMA compliance requirements. Features announced globally arrive in the EU months later, or not at all. Meta's advertising model differs across the Atlantic. Google's search results vary by region, not just for relevance, but for regulatory compliance. The ancient Roman concept of jurisdiction meant the power to speak the law. To have jurisdiction was to have the authority to declare what rules applied within a given territory. For centuries, territory was defined by geography, rivers, mountains, borders. But digital territory has no rivers. It has servers. It has data flows. It has users who exist in one physical location while their data traverses continents in milliseconds.
The question of who has jurisdiction over a phone in your pocket is not a technical question, it's a political one. And it's been answered right now through fines, tariffs, and visa bans.
Long before algorithms, before platforms, before verification badges, and targeted advertising, there was a simpler relationship between individuals and the tools they used. A person owned an object. The object did what the person directed. No government claimed the right to dictate how a hammer could be swung or a pen could write. The phone in your pocket is not like a hammer. It is not inert. It connects to systems you do not control, operated by companies subject to laws you did not vote for, in jurisdictions you have never visited. Every tap generates data that flows across borders. Every scroll is shaped by algorithms designed to capture attention. Every purchase is processed through payment systems embedded in regulatory frameworks. The irony is that both sides claim to be protecting you. Europe says it is defending your privacy, your choice, your right not to be manipulated by algorithms. America says it is defending your freedom, your access to innovation, your right not to have foreign bureaucrats dictate what apps you can use.
Both are sincere, both are incomplete. Neither asks what you actually want. Perhaps the deeper question is not which regulatory empire should control your device. Perhaps it's whether any government should have that power at all. But the question has been already answered. The moment your phone connected to the internet, it became part of infrastructure that spans borders. And infrastructure is always governed by rules. The only question is whose. You thought you owned the device, you thought you controlled what it does, but somewhere between a blue checkmark on X and 120 million euro fine, two governments decided your attention is a matter of national security. The war over your phone has already begun, and the only question is which side wins the right to control what you can do with it. You are on the Dr. Claus channel, where we reveal the hidden architecture of power that shapes your digital life. Thank you and have a good one.